In order to preach a sermon that is not boring, you need to have suspense. And the way you create suspense is by how you structure the sermon. Most of us had to take a speech class back in high school or college. And when we were in our speech classes, we were taught that the way to construct a speech is, number one, you begin with an illustration or a story that introduces your topic. And then two, you then have a thesis statement, one sentence that encapsulates your claim. And then you follow that claim with your arguments that are going to prove that claim. Now that structure is good for a speech, but it's a disaster for a sermon. It's boring for a sermon because it lacks suspense. Instead of beginning with your thesis, begin with a question. If you begin with your thesis, if you're beginning with your answer, then people already know where you're going with the sermon. They can already anticipate what the direction of the sermon is, what the arguments are going to be. Most of your congregation has heard sermons for years. They've heard the good news for years. And so when they hear a thesis that they already agree with, they're going to say to themselves, well, I don't need to listen to this. Nothing new here. And so don't begin with your thesis. Begin with a problem, a question that needs to be solved. So start with a story or an illustration that's going to introduce that problem or question, and then spend the bulk of your sermon exploring various possible answers, especially the answers that our society typically gives. But show how those answers are inadequate or wrong. In fact, show how the pious, pat answers of most Christians are inadequate or wrong. Keep the congregation on the edge of their seats. Have them thinking to themselves, where's the preacher going with this? How in the world is the preacher going to solve this? Oh no! And then, after you've explored all those faulty answers, then come back to your scripture and say something like, this scripture points us in a new direction. And then you state your thesis and you unfold this better, truer answer. The longer you can delay your thesis, the more you're keeping the congregation in suspense, and the more that they are going to listen. Now you'll notice that this narrative structure is the same as what a story uses. A story begins with a hero, and the hero falls into some dilemma. And the hero tries to find the solution to the dilemma, and tries this and tries that, and nothing works. In fact, the problem gets worse. And then, just when you think nothing is going to work, just when you think that all is lost, then, surprisingly, a possible answer appears. And the hero pursues that new direction, and indeed it resolves the problem. This narrative structure is appealing to us because it provides surprise, relief, and joy. And that's what you want your sermon to do. The only time that I would suggest you begin your sermon with your thesis, with your claim, is if your thesis is controversial. If what you are arguing is something that many in the congregation would disagree with, if you put that at the front of the sermon, then you will have people's attention. You'll have people at the edge of their seats going, how is he going to prove that thesis? And so you see, you've created suspense, but you've done it in a different way. This is Ryan Algrim, joining you in your commitment to preach no more boring sermons.